So I want to tell you a little story, just to kind of set off the weekend. This is something that happened to me a long time ago, actually about 36, 37 years ago. And I really didn't understand how lucky I was at the time until many years later. And at the time, I had the blessing of working with a guy named George Geddes. And George at the time was 62, which is exactly how old I am now, which kind of freaks me out. And I was newly married. I had one daughter. I had another one on the way. I was working as a carpenter. And George was the foreman, the boss on site. And he was, it's safe to say that he'd forgotten more about the art of carpentry than I probably still have learned to this day. He was quite a master carpenter. And he was a small guy, small in stature, but big in heart. And he just had a presence about him. Like, he's just one of those guys. He had a presence about him. And he'd done some things. George was proud to say that he joined the Second World War when he was 18. He served for 4 years, and he got out, he was 18. He lied about his age. He was what they called in the RAF one of the bomber boys. And these were these young crews that they sent up in the Lancaster bombers. And they were anywhere from 14 years old to about 21. If you're a pilot, you're an old man at 21 flying a Lancaster bomber over Germany. And he was a quiet man. He didn't really talk much about flying the Lancaster bombers. He did tell me, you know, I knew him for a number of years, and it took about a year and a half before I realized, you know, it came out that he'd survived 3 crews. First crew, and again, keep in mind, he's a young man. He's 14, 15 years old at the time. He's on leave, gets into some shenanigans. He was fine talking about the shenanigans. If you wanted to hear about his leave in London or crap he pulled on his officers, no problem. He just didn't like talking about the missions. But on that particular night of shenanigans, he broke his leg, so he was in the hospital. And his crew was shot down. First crew was shot down over Germany, all hands lost. So he got a second crew. And he was a radio operator, by the way. He didn't fly them. He was actually a radio operator. Second crew, he got mono. Again, he was a teenager. He got mono. He was in the hospital. And that crew, something wrong with the landing gear, and they landed, and as was oft happened with the Lancaster bombers, it went up in flames, and all hands lost. Third crew, he never talked about. I don't know how they perished. He never talked about it. I never asked. He came back from the war. He became a quasi-alcoholic. He told stories about shenanigans where, you know, he made $35 whole a week. And that was enough to pay for his room and board, get him some chewing tobacco, which at that time was they get like a brick. For those of us who had fun when we were younger, it looked like a brick of hash. And even when I knew him, he had this little brick, and he'd take a little bit out and put it under his lip. But that's how they bought tobacco or chewing tobacco back then. And then on Fridays, he had $1 left. And he'd go out to the bar and he'd get a tray of beer. And maybe Lee remembers that, but a tray of beer was a nickel of beer. And for $1, he'd get 20 beer, and he'd enjoy 20 beer all in one night. So that was kind of his thing. He kind of grew up. He got married. He got divorced. He had kids. And then he started to change his life around. And he found the Father, and he found church. And his idea of church was going to prisons on Sundays and talking to the guys in prison about the Word. He was just a neat guy. And I was so blessed to be part of it. And looking back, it was, you know, Isaiah 66:2, and all these my hand have made, and all these that exist, declares Yahweh, and yet such a one I look on him who is poor and bruised of spirit, and who trembles at my word. That was George. He trembled at the word. He was humble. He was poor of spirit. In Chronicles 7:14, he said, my people upon whom my name is called shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways. Then I shall hear from the heavens and forgive their sin and heal their hand. Now, the summer when my second daughter was due, we were working on a custom home way up in God's country, Canada, and we were doing some finished carpentry. We were at the point where we were trimming out the cottage. To say it was a cottage is really an understatement. It was, Hollywood cottage type thing. It had all the amenities. And we had a young man working with us, and he was a laborer. He was young. He was 17 years old. He'd quit high school because he knew everything. And he's one of those guys that, whether he was just trying to be part of the gang or whether it was just his personality, it didn't matter whether you had once played sports. Well, he was the guy that got the touchdown. Didn't matter if you were out having a beer with your buddies on a Friday. He was out having 10 beers with his buddies, and he got 3 of the best looking girls on his arm when he left the bar. He was just one of those guys. He knew it all. He had it nailed down. And I come to think back now, and I think Proverbs 16:15, everyone proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though they join forces, none will go unpunished. And that's important to the story. Psalms 94:2, rise up, O judge of the earth, render punishment to the proud. Well, one day, we were on the tail end of having lunch, or a break, I don't remember which, because it was 37 years ago. And George had opened up about one of his adventures. And keep in mind, it wasn't like he told us war stories. He didn't like telling war stories, but once in a while he would tell us what happened. And he was talking about one of his leaves in London. And no sooner had he finished the story, and this young guy started on some tall tale of his own exploits. So I could tell George had enough. And I figured, okay, so what's going to happen is he's going to go back to the office that night, and that's the last we're going to see this kid on the job site. No, he had a better idea. So a little later in the afternoon, I hear this crash, trim falling on the ground and in the cutting station. And George talking quite loud and angrily, and that's not like him. I thought he'd hurt himself. And I go into the room, and he's doing one of these just like this, like, relax, it's okay. And he's going on, and I mean, Academy Award-winning performance. He's going on about this. I cut this thing too short, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and now I'm going to have to go buy more trim, and this is, we were supposed to finish up today, and just over the top. And I'm looking like, what the heck is going on here? Well, in comes the young kid. And George kind of stops, and he looks at the kid, and he says, you know what, I think I can fix this. He says, I tell you what I want you to do. I want you to go up to my van. In the back of my van, it's about 3 feet long. It's got clamps on either end, a big red handle, so a red handle board stretcher. I want you to go up and get that. I think I could stretch this piece of trim out just enough to make it work. So up this kid goes to the van. He's gone 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes later, he comes back exasperated. George, I couldn't find it. I looked everywhere. I couldn't find it. Well, I'm in on it at this time. I get what's going on. So I said, well, George, I got that one I found at the auction. It's not good as yours, but it's that blue handle one I showed you the other day. Well, now George is in his glory. He goes, well, okay, we'll try yours then. I said, okay, it's in the back of my truck. You got to go back. Well, he's gone for another 20 minutes. Comes back, I can't find it. I looked everywhere. I can't find any blue handled anything. Well, by this time, we decided to come clean on what was going on, and that kid was a little bit humble there for a couple of days. Didn't last long, but for a couple of days. This weekend here, you are surrounded by men who've been there and done that. In this audience alone, I know for a fact there's 2 former fighter pilots. Top that. Anybody? Okay. Lawyers? Guys that have served? Number. Yeah. There's guys that have done that, been there. And there's the rest of us that have had other interesting adventures of a different sort. But hey, we don't have to talk about that today because I don't have my lawyer present. The point is, be, as James said, 1:19, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Or in Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me. I want us all to have an awesome weekend. I want us all to fellowship. I want us all to learn. But I really don't want anyone being sent for a red-handled board stretcher. So thank you for coming. Enjoy your weekend. We are so glad you're all here. And if I'm not mistaken, my handy helpers are just about got dinner ready, so give us about 15, 20 minutes.
We're going to do sundown at 6:05. We're going to blow shofars at 6:05. And welcome to Sabbath.
And then we'll have dinner. Okay, so you got a few minutes.
And then 7 o'clock we're going to do the Torah portion.
Yep.
And it's going to be a midrash. And whoever's hasn't been in a midrash will explain it. It'll be good and it'll be nice. It'll go as long as it needs to go tonight.
You want to do the holla at sunset or at the beginning of the midrash?
Let's do the beginning of midrash.
Perfect.
Okay, we're all good?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, guys.